It is the double nickel episode of the Glass of Joe podcast with PJ Glasser. I'm Joe Malfa. And usually we have a little segment, just the two of us before our guest. But when we hopped on the Zoom, I saw that ungodly mustache on the face of our guest this week, Ryan Wormeli. Welcome to the show. Do you need a razor, my friend?
No, I do have a razor.
I hope it's for a good cause.
That's
If it's
how
for a
I
good
crafted
cause, I
this.
feel like a bad person.
I crafted this beautiful mustache with a razor, so it's very intentional. It's not for a cause other than
Okay.
I just thought it would be fun. I was shaving and I saved the mustache for last, and I was like, you know what? I don't hate it. I'm gonna rock with it for a couple of days. You'll notice I'm also wearing the Orioles Hawaiian shirt that you missed out on, not coming to the O's game with PJ and myself and a couple of our other friends.
Joe, he's growing an Orioles playoff beard. He's got to start it like that because it's going to take about 4 years until it finally gets around the
true story. In college, I decided just for fun during one of the Ravens playoff runs when Joe Flacco had a Fu Manchu. I had a big beard and I decided to shave it down to a Fu Manchu. I did not tell the girl I was seeing at the time. And she came over to my apartment and opened the door, saw the Fu Manchu, said nothing, turned around and walked away. I can't
say that I am surprised, but before we pile too much onto you, we've had you in guest and surprise spots before. We've once had you in an official spot. We welcome you back in an official role this week, and it is with a new job title and a blue check mark on Twitter. So please elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, the two are unrelated. The blue check mark came first, which was exciting. Probably helped lead to me getting the other job. But yeah, I started 3.5 weeks ago at Fantasy Pros. Very exciting, doing a lot of social media stuff there. My title is social media coordinator. So, I had a great time at NBC Sports Washington, met a lot of cool people, including you two. But I am no longer there. I can no longer be your official NBC Ravens correspondent.
Right.
I can now just hit on everything because we tweet and do Facebook and Instagram and TikTok for all the sports. Fantasy football is obviously the biggest. It's always going to be the behemoth when it comes to clicks and stuff. But it's been a lot of fun so far. I'm really, really happy there. And it gives me a lot more flexibility, a lot more free time that I can spend preparing for podcasts with you guys.
There we go. No longer our NBC Ravens correspondent, now our NFL fantasy football correspondent. So we'll dive right into it. Cam Akers blows out his Achilles in training. Very, very unfortunate news. From a fantasy perspective and from a Rams perspective, because they still need to play football too, and so we can get the fantasy points. Who do they turn to?
Well, how about from a Maryland perspective, Jake Funk, perhaps?
Jake Funk is
seventh round draft pick, running back out of Maryland. Darrell Henderson is the obvious guy, and he has had injury problems in the past as well, but he was also a day 2 pick for them, just like Cam Akers was. He has been better. He's been more efficient. He's literally been a better runner on a per touch basis since entering the NFL over Cam Akers. I think he's going to be great. I don't know that they're going to actually go out and bring in. A lot of people were like, oh, are they bringing back Todd Gurley now? Are they going to go after Adrian Peterson now? I don't know that that's going to be the case. Running back is such a transient position anyways. Like, you expect attrition, that I don't know why you would ever waste money and allocate significant resources there like you would need to do to bring in a bigger name. So I think it's going to be the Henderson show as long as he can prove that he can stay healthy. Obviously, Malcolm Brown's still there. And I say it kind of jokingly, but Jake Funk, I firmly believe, will have a role on the team. He has proven doubters wrong ever since being a 2-star recruit in Western Maryland. So I have a ton of faith in him as well. It just sucks. For Akers, obviously, first and foremost, like clearly we come at it from the fantasy perspective and the fan perspective, but like tearing your Achilles is one of the worst injuries you can suffer, especially as an athlete, especially as a running back where you need to make cuts. So it's really tough. There was a list going around Twitter yesterday of a whole lot of different running backs who have had Achilles tears in their early to mid 20s. And like basically none of them came back at full strength or at all. So it really is tough for a guy that was super talented, was poised to have a breakout year in Sean McVay's system. And then the other thing I will say is running back is awful this year. I don't like anybody. Even like Christian McCaffrey is coming off only playing 3 games.
Everybody has question marks.
Like Derrick Henry, eventually he's not going to keep beating regression. Dalvin Cook is an injury prone player. Like Alvin Kamara no longer has Drew Brees checking down him all the time. I just don't like any running backs early this year. And I've always been on the side whenever I play fantasy, not just covered it, of get as many running backs as you can early. I don't know if that's the case this year.
So glad you brought those three names up. I was on the Fantasy Pros website, and the writers
brand. There you go.
they like to break each position into tiers. So they have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I was a little surprised that for running backs, their tier 1 only consisted of 3 guys. Now, all the 3 of those guys should be tier 1 running backs: McCaffrey, Dalvin, and Derrick Henry. But do you think that there's a drop off after that, or do you think there's 1 or 2 more guys that you think should be in tier 1?
I don't think there's as much of a drop off as the tiers would have you believe. And part of that is sort of what I was getting at, in that they all have question marks, including the tier 1 guys. And part of it is that the other guys have just as much upside, I think, as those. Maybe not as much as a Christian McCaffrey. I mean, no one else in the league is going to rush for 1,000 yards and catch for 1,000 yards if they stay healthy. But Nick Chubb, to me, is the best pure runner of the football in the NFL, and he plays in a very run-heavy offense. As long as Hunt doesn't take too much of his carries, I don't see any reason why he can't be a tier 1 guy. You know, Jonathan Taylor was a tier 1 guy in the second half of last season with the Colts, and yes, Marlon Mack is technically coming back, but he's also coming off an Achilles, and Jonathan Taylor was a second-round pick. They're going to give him touches. And I believe that Carson Wentz will have a better year now that he's back with Frank Reich. So I think that offense is still going to be good. You know, in a PPR format, Austin Eckler is going to catch a lot of passes. I think the Chargers offense could take off this year. So I really don't think there's a wide gap there. I get the Henry thing is tough for people because he shouldn't be as good as he is. Like, people don't do what he's doing at his size and speed. And PJ, obviously you've watched him longer than anybody, being a Bama guy, but like, eventually you have to think it's not going to work out anymore.
The carries this guy has on his legs, even going back to Bama.
But having said all that, like, until the regression comes, like, might as well ride the wave, right? I mean, he's been unbelievable.
They really, Tennessee, they never bring in like a secondary back to give them a break, you know?
And I, in my dynasty league, had Darrington Evans all of last season. And I was like, he's my handcuff, and he'll get a lot of carries, you know, even as a second guy, because they run a lot. No, they just gave 350 touches or whatever it was to Henry. And somehow, not only does he get better every season, like within the season, he's better in December than he is in September. He also gets better every year. He keeps adding to, like, it blows my mind how he's doing what he's doing. The other guy I didn't mention yet, who I love, obviously everybody loves as an athlete, is Saquon, but he's another guy coming off injury. But in a PPR format, that guy's, if he's healthy, is going to catch 70 passes. He's going to break off 3 or 4 70-yard touchdown runs. I mean, there's a ton of talent. Like I said, there's just so many question marks that for me, it's really hard to separate at the top. I basically view all of those running backs, maybe outside McCaffrey, because it wasn't a devastating injury last year. It was just sort of an accumulation of a couple different injuries. Outside of him, I pretty much feel like every running back, to me at least, is in the same sort of tier where I could take him in the first round and cross my fingers, but I'm really not feeling awesome about it.
And I agree with you. The biggest question mark to me, and they have him listed as number 5, is Alvin Kamara. And he puts up a lot of potential, but not having Drew Brees, I think, is going to affect him big time. Sean Payton's obviously as good as it gets, is what he does in calling plays. But I think there's a lot of value this year at running back. And looking at the guys that they have in tier 3, J.K. Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire are the 2 that stick out to me. Dobbins, with Ingram gone, now that he has a full preseason, OTAs, training camp, and the fact that the Ravens now have a 17th game like everybody else does, they're going to be very particular with how they run Lamar this year. I think Dobbins gets a heavy workload. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, all this hype about him last year and how Andy Reid's comparing him to Brian Westbrook and all this and that. He was a rookie too, and now he's coming back. And I think those are 2 guys that I definitely think you can get some great value on in the second round.
So 2 quick nuggets on guys that we already mentioned. Derrick Henry, going back to 2013, his first year as a feature guy at Bama, he's had 1,800 carries. So that's a lot of wear and tear. So we'll see. Alvin Kamara, how many touchdowns does he have vultured by Latavius Murray and by the glorified Tim Tebow that they have there with Taysom Hill? One guy that I'm astonished neither of you mentioned, who is my kind of ride or die guy this year, because his situation has improved. And you look at his numbers last year before a injury to a teammate and after. Saquon Barkley. I'm looking at my list here. Right division, wrong guy. Ezekiel Elliott. I built him up like that and said the wrong name. Ezekiel Elliott. Neither of you mentioned him. Nobody's talking about him. Dak is back. Their offensive line has improved a bit. His numbers pre and post Dak injury are staggeringly different.
Zeke is the most overrated player in football.
So I definitely side more with Joe on this one. In fact, I probably should have mentioned him earlier. I think he still fits in that tier of the guys like Chubb and Taylor in sort of that under McCaffrey tier. And it just came out, it didn't come out today, but he was giving a quote today that he's at his lowest weight since his freshman year at Ohio State. So he is getting in better shape. He is still big enough. It's not like he's like thin now and not going to be able to
wait, hold on. We can't
of a workload, but
we can't speed past PJ saying he's overrated. PJ, since he's come into the league, 1,631 yards, 15 touchdowns in a 15-game season. He missed a game. The next year, in 10 games, 983 and 7 touchdowns. In 15 games, 1,434, 6 touchdowns. In a full 16-game season, 1,357 and 12 touchdowns. And last year, the team unraveled 15 games, 986 touchdowns, which is still not bad at all.
Zeke was the benefactor early in his career of having the best offensive line in football.
But it's not just early in the careers. It's since then, too.
But since then, the defense has been absolutely poo-poo in Dallas, and he's been very fortunate in getting those junkyard touchdowns, receiving or rushing or whatever it is. I've never been a huge Zeke guy. He can be productive at times, but last year, Tony Pollard was the best back on Dallas. And to me, it really wasn't close when you just watch him play. Not to say it'll be that this year, but I thought Pollard was better last year.
Here's the thing. If I'm building a real-life NFL team, am I giving Ezekiel Elliott $90 million over 6 years? Of course not. But if I'm building a fantasy team, I'm thinking about the fact that the Cowboys gave him $90 million over 6 years, and they're going to want to get their money's worth. They're going to give him the ball as many times as they can. And I do, obviously, with Dak back, like Joe mentioned, the offense is going to be a lot better. They're still playing in the NFC East. I know Washington has a good defense at least, but he can still run over the Giants. He can still run over the Eagles. Like this is a team that's going to score a lot of points at the very least. The Cowboys may or may not be any good, but they're going to score points, and Zeke is going to get a lot of those. I do want to circle back to what PJ was saying on some of the younger guys. I love Clyde this year. My favorite player in fantasy across any sport is the post-type sleeper, and everybody loved Clyde. He was a first-round pick in a lot of leagues last season, being with the Chiefs, first-round draft pick in the NFL draft. Didn't pan out that way, but PJ's totally right. I mean, this is a guy that Andy Reid was giving major props to last season. I would just love to get him in the second round of every draft that I can. And Dobbins is really tricky for me because when you have a rushing quarterback like Lamar, and yes, the Ravens always talk about wanting to pull him back and not let him take too much of a beating, but at his core, he is still going to take off and scramble a lot. He's just too good at it not to. And that's a good thing for the Ravens. But Dobbins is going to miss out on touches in the red zone just because Lamar is going to take off. They love Gus Edwards down there. And he's not going to get the catches out of the backfield. It's sort of the same issue with Alvin Kamara in New Orleans. Now that there's Hill and Winston there and not Breeze, he's not getting those check down passes. I don't think Dobbins is going to get those either. Lamar doesn't really check down to the running backs, and they don't design many pass plays specifically for the running backs to run routes, even though Dobbins might have the capability of doing that. It certainly looks like it in training camp. So he's going to rush for 5.5 yards a carry. He's going to be ridiculously efficient. And I love his talent. I love his fit. He's a perfect running back for the Baltimore Ravens, but I don't know if he's going to have that breakout fantasy year because touchdowns drive fantasy production. And I don't know if he's going to get those opportunities.
Warren, before we ask you about baseball, when is the right time to have a fantasy draft? Because injuries are inevitable. We just saw it with Cam Akers. And, to me, the perfect draft is Labor Day, right after the fourth game of the preseason, heading into week one. You kind of have a good idea of who's healthy, who's not, who's going to be playing and all that. When is your ideal time to draft?
So it sort of depends on the league you're playing in. For me, if I'm playing in a league against people who maybe don't care as much as I do or aren't going to do as much research, aren't going to be as prepared going into the fantasy season, I'm pushing to have that draft as early as possible because I can take advantage of people who don't know where the trends are going.
What a nice guy.
And who don't. Well, I would say this is true of my family league, but I don't push that one to be early because I know like they need all the help they can get. But in other leagues where I'm a little bit more competitive, I think the earlier, the better you can take advantage of of being able to anticipate where the trends are going, what players are going to rise and have opportunities and a chance to break out. But if the injuries are always a big issue, right? And especially in the NFL more so than like Major League Baseball, there are injuries in training camp every year. It's already started with Akers, like we led off with. So I do think Labor Day is a good one if you're just like, we all want to be on the same page. We all want to know what we can know going into it. But I do think it's sneaky helpful for people who are going to prepare by using the mock draft simulator at fantasypros.com to have it earlier and sort of get a leg up on your league. But I think Labor Day drafts are awesome. That's usually our busiest week of the year, because that's when everybody's trying to do their drafts at the same time. And there's a reason for it. It's sort of the perfect timing.
Before we started going off to college and stuff, my main fantasy football group, we would actually get together to watch the Thursday night season opener and do our draft that day. And then if you happen to draft anybody who's playing in that game, we'll go in manually and put their game in. But that's what we always had done till the last second. Make sure you get all the injuries in, and it's always a nice time to get together to watch and welcome football.
That's a fun tradition. One year the one league I do in-person draft every year. We get the whole big board, we put it up on the wall, go put your own stickers on everything. It's great. It was like the 8th or 9th round of that draft, and one of the guys in our league had taken Andrew Luck, and literally that night was the night that he announced his retirement. And he was like, "Oh, like, do you mind if I go back and like change that to another quarterback, like one who hasn't been taken yet, obviously, but can I go change it?" Because I was the commissioner. And I was like, "No, absolutely not. Like, if he'd gotten hurt, we wouldn't be doing this. Like, I'm sorry. That's the worst luck of all time. No pun intended." But like, I'm sorry. That's what you draft a quarterback with your next pick. Because I mean, whoever was the backup that year, Brissett, is going to go soon. So you better take him while you can. But yeah, I mean, you never really can plan the timing. Injuries can happen whenever, but it does help to wait if you can from that perspective.
And especially if you could wait. Well, now the preseason structured differently, but as long as you waited until after the 3rd preseason game, since nobody played the 4th preseason game anyway. But then again, I think it was Jordy Nelson that year who tore his ACL after the 3rd preseason game in practice before the 4th one. So there's no rhyme or reason or way of knowing it. But moving over to baseball now, trade deadline very rapidly approaching. A very anticipated one, especially because the entire Cubs roster is up for sale, apparently. Who is a team that you think needs to make a big splash, and a player that you would love to see go to a team that's a perfect fit? Not necessarily a trade you think will happen, but just a perfect fit that you would love to see happen.
Sure. So the first one, I'll answer your first question first in terms of making a splash. I don't like the Giants roster at all. I was like looking at the standings today to like make sure, oh, is there anything I missed or like just completely overlooked? And I was like, nope, the Giants are still somehow in first place in that division. And I pulled up their depth chart and I'm like, yeah, I still don't like any of these guys. I don't think it's a good roster, but the numbers, the underlying analytics show that they're a good team. This is not some fluky, like winning a bunch of extra innings and they sneaky have a negative run differential. It's not that. They have one of the best run differentials in the sport. They're leading the division that I think has the 2 most talented teams in the sport in the Dodgers and Padres. So like more power and more credit to them for getting to this point. But to me, that reeks of a team that needs to make a splash, where you've done a great job building this buffer early in the season of banking all these wins. But I don't trust that it's going to continue unless you actually upgrade the talent on your roster. And I think they could really, add anybody, maybe not Trevor Story, who I know is a really big name on the market for a lot of people because the Rockies are terrible, just because they have, Brandon Crawford when he's healthy. So I'm not sure who the ideal player is on that team. I do kind of feel like Max Scherzer, if the Nats are willing to sell, is the type of guy that could fit anywhere. And like, obviously he would make that Giants rotation that much better if you could slot him in at the top. I'd really like to see the Cardinals add somebody like Scherzer, and Scherzer did go to Mizzou, so that would be kind of a homecoming for him if they were to slide him in at the top of the rotation. The player team fit that I actually like a lot, and I promise I'm not just trying to make Joe feel good, is Chris Bryant to the Mets.
Oh yeah.
And one of the cool parts about Bryant is that he can really fit with any team because he is so versatile.
Anywhere.
He can play third base. He can play corner outfield. I saw him play center field once at a game.
He said center field he thinks is his own best position, and he doesn't even play it.
Which is crazy, and I think he's probably wrong about that. But that just shows you that he is capable of doing it. He's hit really well this year. He was when he came out in the 2013 draft, he was my favorite bat I had seen. outside of Harper, he was my favorite bat I had seen in like the 7 or 8 years at that point in my life that I'd been paying attention to the draft. I absolutely loved him. And he's lived up to that, and more in the in the league since he came in. Obviously won the World Series and everything. He's an icon in Chicago. But like you mentioned, they do seem very willing to move guys, and him and Baez and everybody seems to be available. One of the annoying things for me as a baseball fan in recent years is I feel like the trade deadline has gradually gotten a lot less fun. There's really
Yeah.
not as many, fireworks, blockbuster trades as there used to be, which is disappointing as a fan. I sort of get it. Right now, as the CBA is currently constructed, it just doesn't make sense to trade top prospects. They are like by far the best asset you can have outside of like a Tatis or an Acuna or a Soto who's like proven themselves as a 20-year-old, which are extraordinarily rare. Outside of that, there's really like no better asset than a top prospect. So it's harder to trade guys, and teams that are looking to sell sort of have to set their sights a little bit lower to be willing to part ways with their best players, which is unfortunate. But I do wonder if the upcoming, changes to the CBA, there is, I hope there's not going to be a strike or a lockout or anything, but tensions are high between the league and the players, and we don't know where it's going to end up. There are going to be changes to the CBA, whatever those look like. And one of the big issues is how they treat these young players and all the service time manipulations. Oh, he needs to work on his defense for the first 2 weeks of April. Then we call him up, get the extra year of team control. It's smart for the team. It's bad for the player. It's bad for the sport. So I wonder if anticipation of that changing might make teams more willing to part with some of their top prospects. It's sort of a tricky line to toe there. That was sort of a really long answer that went way too many different directions for you guys. But yeah, Chris Bryant to the Mets is one of my favorites. Unfortunately, I hate admitting that to a rabid Mets fan. But really, it's also a weird year because a lot of the teams that I expected to be good, I thought the Twins were going to be great this year, and they're not. They're horrendous. So like I still believe, again, looking at that roster, I don't believe that the first 3 months has made that a bad roster. They just haven't played up to expectations. So if you're Minnesota, do you say, well, we're going to officially throw in the towel? Which
Yeah, I think
they
they've dug
probably should from a
themselves way
numbers
too big of a
perspective.
hole, though.
Maybe that's not the best example, but there are teams that I really like that aren't doing the things I expected them to do. I mean, I did mention the Cardinals. I thought they were going to win that division, and they're sitting at exactly 500. So it's really tough when you look at your roster and see one thing, and you look at your record and see something else, and you have to weigh, well, is 3 months a big enough sample size to actually commit to these really franchise-altering moves?
And that brings us right into the next question we wanted to ask you. PJ and I have talked a lot about the Yankees on this pod. They're off to a good start in the second half, but they're still 3.5 back of Oakland, 5.5 back of Tampa. When we did the episode 3 weeks ago, PJ asked me if they'd still win the division. And I said, I don't think they can make the playoffs anymore. I just don't see the math adding up for them. Where do you stand on the Yankees? I guess not with the division. I don't think they're catching Boston, but getting in, period.
Yeah, one of the things with looking at playoff races in baseball is, and really in any sport, is you can't just look at how far they're back of the leader. You have to look at the teams they have to pass. Like in the division, for example, they don't just have to catch Boston. They also have to pass the Rays, who are really good and despite never having talent, are always at the top of the East. So it's going to be really tricky for them. Um, the Yankees for the last few years, it feels like every season I find myself saying, man, if they ever get healthy, watch out. And they just never are.
Yeah.
And this year, it hasn't even been the worst injury luck they've had in recent years. It's just been enough to hurt them and set them back enough to say maybe they are going to be on the outside looking in. I know that you were really excited to get Giancarlo in our fantasy league. And of course, you can never
He's
rely
been the
on
main
him
guy
healthy.
staying healthy on the Yankees, though.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying is you can't even expect him to be healthy moving forward, right? Because you
Right.
can never expect him to be healthy looking into the future. So yeah, that's sort of a long-winded way of saying like I don't really believe in them. And they don't have as many teams to catch, obviously, in the wild card race. I mean, they are the team looking on the outside looking in right now. But I just think the other teams of baseball are too good. If they were to make a splash, it would certainly not surprise me. I'm sure they see themselves as buyers, and they could go out and get like a Scherzer or a Bryant or a Trevor Story or anybody. And it almost doesn't matter who they have on their roster already. They can afford to go get a guy and move somebody off their position and just try and make a run, because that's what the Yankees do every year. If I had to pick though, like gun to my head, I'm saying they don't make the playoffs right now.
Interesting. All right, Warren. Well, this is what you've been waiting for all pod. Before we get into the Swift Seven, we all three of us were into Marvel. We watch all the movies, the TV shows. Now, Black Widow's out in theaters. Before we talk about that, Loki just finished up a couple weeks ago. So, was that your favorite TV show of the three that we've seen so far?
Of the three Marvel shows, absolutely. I don't think it's even close, actually. I really liked WandaVision, but I struggled with the finale. Falcon Winter Soldier, or as I should say, spoiler alert, Captain America and Winter Soldier, I thought was good, but it felt like there was something missing, and it's been really hard for me to sort of put my finger on what exactly that
A
was.
real villain. That's what was missing the whole time.
Yeah, it's hard for me to blame them though, because apparently it was supposed to be an airborne virus like plot line with sort of a bioweapon, and they obviously had to scrap that because that would have been hitting too close to home during COVID. And it's, even in watching the finale of that show, I really thought the action was very good and fun and compelling. Right. I just felt like again there was something missing there. Whereas WandaVision, I thought it was really great and had a lot of substance throughout, and then it was just they sort of fell into the same old Marvel issue of big sky beam and CGI battle at the end, and I could take or leave that. Loki has been awesome. It's been one of my favorite shows I've watched like all year, Marvel or anywhere else. I think it's been terrific. It's been stellar performances across the board. I think the music, the score of the show is incredible. Natalie Holt is the composer. She has done a phenomenal job. Even just like the theme song when the credits come on with the Loki, all the changing the letters and everything. I think every episode has been really well directed, like even more so than the other shows we've seen. Just interesting camera work, a lot of spinning, like corkscrew type shots. It's been just a really interesting show to watch from a filmmaking perspective or a show making perspective. And then even aside from that, it's just a fun story. Tom Hiddleston is endlessly charismatic as Loki. He's one of the greatest characters Marvel has given us over the course of this whole saga. Sylvie has been a great addition so far. My only complaint really is I wish it was a more self-contained story at the end of it. I like the finale. I thought the finale was really good, and I think Jonathan Majors is going to be a great Kang the Conqueror, and I'm really excited about the future. I wish there was a little bit more resolution, but like in that final shot when I'm assuming spoilers are okay, but in that final shot when Mobius doesn't recognize him and then he looks up and it's very Planet of the Apes-esque, like sees the statue of Kang, I was like, wow, like my heart was racing. Like I rarely get twisted by shows anymore. It's just hard. You can generally see what's coming when they hit you with that big whammy. And I was hit with that big whammy. And that was a really cool moment. I think the show has been brilliant. And I'm really excited that it's the first one that they have announced will have a season 2 because I cannot wait for season 2.
And that's what I was going to get to. The one complaint with one of my coworkers too, that we went back and forth on this, that he had the same complaint that it wasn't self-contained enough. Yes, Kevin Feige and Marvel have come out and said that they want the shows to be self-contained while still also tying into the movies. But I've been sitting here saying to myself the whole time, how can you have that happen? Either it's self-contained or it isn't. You can't dip one toe in, one toe out. All of the fan base that they have right now are going to watch the shows and they're going to watch the movies. So there's no issue crossing over. And I also thought too, for the complaints of it, again, the lack of self-containment, what else would you have liked to see? And I don't mean to single you out. I mean, just in general, anybody who had that same complaint. This show, think of the things it had to accomplish. It had to set up its own season 2, set up the groundwork for Spider-Man, for Ant-Man, and for the next Doctor Strange, and still satisfy closing its own arcs from the first season. It had a lot to do. It didn't quite stick the landing as well as Game of Thrones season 8 did, but like it did a pretty good job.
Okay, first of all, please don't, unless you want to end the Zoom call, start a new one to give me a fresh 40 minutes, don't bring up Game of Thrones season 8, first of all. Second of all, I wish I hadn't used the word complaint. I'd really call it more of a nitpick on that point. Right. I thought it was a very well done finale, and I do recognize that the fact that there is a season 2 makes us look at it different. It's hard because the first 2 Marvel shows sort of taught us as a fan base and an audience that the big villain that you think is going to be the secret behind it isn't going to be the case. There was no Mephisto in WandaVision. The Power Broker was just one of the characters in Falcon and Winter Soldier. This one actually did introduce Kang, the guy that people have been theorizing about for the whole run of the show. It also taught us that these were going to be self-contained stories that were really just long movies that weren't going to continue on. Well, that's not the case with Loki. This really is more of a TV show. I do wish we had gotten to see a little bit more of the Loki Mobius, like, move around buddy cop movie dynamic that it looked like they were building towards, and basically ended after the first episode's the introduction. The second episode, you kind of get that, but then the end of the second episode, he goes off with Sylvie. So you really don't get much of that. So it's interesting to me that it looked like they were building up to that, only to sort of yank it away and really make Loki and Sylvie the central relationship on the show. But again, this is all stuff that makes it stand out from the last two shows. It makes it different, and it was really refreshing and energizing to me. I will cop to it. I have been getting Marvel fatigue, maybe slowly seeping in more and more the last few years. I know PJ is new to the franchise because he just binged it all last year. But for people who've been watching for now 13 years, at a certain point, it does sort of feel like I'm kind of ready for a different type of storytelling. Having a show like Loki is the exact sort of thing that will reel me all the way back in. And I cannot wait for season 2. I think it was just so well done on every level: performance, writing, direction, score. Everything was so together and on the same page that I was really blown away. And to me, it's been my favorite piece of Marvel content easily since Endgame.
I would agree. And Black Widow, you had a chance to see that recently. We talked about tiers with running backs. So if you had to put Black Widow in the tier of Marvel movies, where would you land it?
Man, that's a tough one. I don't know what number I would put it on because I would need to sit down and actually rank.
So your upper echelon is Endgame, Infinity War. You love Black Panther, right? And Civil War.
Civil War.
So it's probably, is it like a touch below that? Is it below that?
I would put it, if you were breaking all the movies alone, let's ignore the shows. If you're breaking all the movies into, let's call it 5 tiers, I think Black Widow is near the top of tier 3. It's not in that tier 1, and I don't think it's even remotely close to tier 1. Tier 2, I wouldn't say it's far off, but it doesn't quite get there for me. I have a lot of problems with the story and like the script in Black Widow.
It was very different than some of the other movies.
But I will say the action is visceral. It's really like it was very interesting to watch Marvel sort of go there with the action. Obviously, they didn't have like the blood and guts of like a Deadpool, but there was a lot of like hand-to-hand combat, very Bourne-esque that fighting scenes that I hadn't seen in a while, and I didn't actually get to see it in the theater. I just rented it at home. But I do feel like this is the type of movie that's like welcome back to movie theaters, like all big set pieces.
I felt that. I saw it in theaters.
Really cool action, big movie stars. But I thought the Russian accents were weak, like that sort of thing. There's not really a ton of humor in the movie outside of Florence Pugh and David
Her whole character was humor.
I know, I'm saying outside of those characters. It's kind of hard because Marvel is built around these quippy superheroes, and Black Widow is just not a funny character, like either in the comics or in the iteration we've seen in the MCU. And I adore Scarlett Johansson. I think she's a fantastic actress. It's not a knock on her at all. She can do comedy, but it's just not the way the character's really written. So it's kind of weird to see her almost misplaced in that family with the Red Guardian cracking jokes and, oh, look at that beer belly. And we all love David Harbour, who I'm now realizing I'm kind of dressed like from his character in Stranger Things. I kind of look like Hopper a little.
Kind of will, Jim Hopper.
And Florence Pugh, who's just like steals every scene in every movie she's in, is relentlessly charismatic. So it almost felt like the character was a little miscast next to them. But again, it was still really fun. Like Marvel movies are inherently enjoyable to watch. I really like them. I don't think this quite hit the mark of what it could have been. I also don't like prequels in general for big franchises because there's just no stakes. Like every time she's in a fight, okay, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she's going to survive this. So it's a little hard to get too invested. And I will also say I'm kind of out on Marvel fight scenes. Not that I think they're done poorly. I think they used to be done a lot worse. I think they've gotten better over the years in terms of choreography. But I just have come to the realization that I don't watch TV shows or movies for the action scenes anymore. I much more care about the dialogue and the back and forth and the charisma and the jokes and the interesting narrative and weaving of stories and plot lines and all that stuff. And that's just not what this movie was. This movie leaned really heavily into action, and they did a really great job at it. it just didn't quite land for me. But again, we're talking about a tier 3 Marvel movie. I'm not saying this is down with like Thor: The Dark World or the second Guardians of the Galaxy 2. That one in particular.
Whoa.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Whoa. Guardians of the
Second
Galaxy 2.
Guardians.
Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is a bad movie. It's just not a good movie.
There's
Better
we
than
could have
Doctor
a whole
Strange.
episode on this kind of stuff, but
Better than Doctor Strange. What are you talking about?
Doctor Strange.
Oh my gosh. We
Oh,
really
God.
do need to do a whole just like a Marvel, Pixar, everything dedicated entire episode.
there will be you know what? As the summer goes along, that's not a bad call. Just for the real diehard GOJ fans here, a bonus pop out, non-numbered, movie specific episode is what we'll have to get into.
I can't believe you like Guardians too. I'm like actually shocked by that. I thought that movie it's probably my least favorite Marvel movie.
All right, and with that, we will take you into the Swift 7. But first, actually, as we're recording, and since we were talking about it before, the first big-ish trade went down. Nelson Cruz, now a Tampa Bay Ray, per Jeff Passan. So the Rays, typically not involved in the trade market, the first to make a splash and get the veteran who, to answer your question about the Twins, turning into sellers.
They're going back to the World Series again. Tom Brady goes to Tampa, and just all those teams decide to.
Frankly, he's a really good fit there. He knows the AL East. He dominated his year in 2014 with the O's, and the Rays. The one thing they don't seem to do well is grow great hitters. Great defenders, great pitching, but they usually don't have the bats themselves. So that's a great fit for them. And as long as what is he, 42 now, 43? As long as
he's old,
raking, I mean.
Do you think if he hits 2 home runs in his first 2 at bats, Kevin Cash will pull him in the 7th inning?
Oh God! We're not going down that path. Number
Sorry,
one,
Kevin.
number one of this was, hey, at least you know what? Maybe you know what? I'm not going to go to the Ubaldo Britton thing. Number one of the Swift 7.
Oh yeah, that's a dark wound right there. That's just bad.
Do you have a favorite NFL rivalry to watch that does not involve the Ravens?
Ooh, I would say historically Packers Bears, just because I just like the tradition of it and how old it is, but more modern 49ers Seahawks, just because they've been so good this last decade by and large. Obviously, there's ups and downs for every team. The fans really seem to hate each other. It's sort of similar to Pittsburgh Baltimore, where there's like some respect, but also like they really don't like each other. So that would probably be my choice.
Number 2, we know 16-0 is difficult enough. There's always clamoring every year. Won't it happen with a certain team? Will a team ever go 17-0? It's only one extra game, but an extra game makes a big difference because how many teams have gone 15-1 but not 16-0?
I'm going to say no, but because I think the NFL wants to bump up to 18 games as soon as they are able to. So I don't think the 17-game schedule is going to exist long enough for a team to do that. If you ask me, like, will a team go undefeated again? It will happen at some point. That's just like the nature of things is flukes sometimes happen and outlier seasons happen, but I don't think a team will go 17-0.
Fair. If you could bring back any team's throwbacks on a permanent basis in the NFL, which ones would you bring back?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I can tell you that I would not bring back the Steelers. I hate those Bumblebee uniforms. I also hate the creamsicle Bucks uniforms. Those are terrible as well. That's a really good question. I'm actually also gonna say not the Ravens. I don't like those early like 90s.
No, their jerseys now are better.
There was some tweet going. I know this is supposed to be a Swift 7. There was some tweet going around the other day that was like, they should bring back this old logo, and it was the like B on the with the wings Ravens helmet. And I was like, that's like an ugly logo. I don't enjoy that one. I think I know that they haven't like gotten too far away from it, but I'd say the Chargers. I just love the color scheme so much that anything they
powder
do,
blues, baby, great.
That's jerseys powder blue. It's gorgeous. It really is. I just love to watch.
They should wear it every game. I don't know why they don't.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, too much of something, then it doesn't become good anymore. Like Peeps. Peeps were great when it was just Easter. Now Peeps are year round, different flavors. Everybody hates Peeps.
Peeps are the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 of candy. They stink.
Oh God. But give me those powder blues all day long. Number 4, Worm, if you were athletic and played any sport in college, what local college park business would you have wanted to be your sponsor now that the NIL rules are in place?
First of all, I don't appreciate using the word "if" on me being athletic. Um,
If.
second of all, I did work for them, so it's kind of weird. I love me some DP dough. I was a delivery driver.
Okay, which
for them for a
business
year
that
and a
is
half.
still actually open in College Park would you want to sponsor you?
By
I
the
don't
way,
even-
the Swift 7 has turned into the elongated 14 by where
Come on. Is this your first time having me on, PJ? You know how this works. The interesting thing about that is every time I go to College Park now for a game, I like see all these restaurants and bars and stuff that I don't recognize. So I'm a little limited on this one of what actually exists anymore. The obvious one that is probably the correct one is Bentley's.
Fence or Marathon, one of the two.
Worm, Giannis, over or under 3.5 titles in his career?
Including the one he just got, like in his
Correct. So will he win 2 more or 3 more?
I'm going to say under, but I'm also going to say whatever MVP line you give me, I'm going to say over. But under on championships.
What summer Olympic sport do you enjoy watching the most?
I'm most impressed by gymnastics, but I did swim for a lot of my life growing up, so that's just kind of the fun one because I obviously I've never been as fast as an Olympic swimmer, but I can sort of like put myself in that scenario. And I would say that's one also that I am closest with watching with my parents because they were really into swimming and stuff. So that's a phoner for me. But the gymnastics one, that's the one that makes my jaw drop. I have no comprehension of how they're capable of doing the stuff they do.
Will Aaron Rodgers start for the Packers week 1? Yes or no?
Yes. I think he just likes being a drama queen, but I think at the end of the day, it makes the most sense for him to stay in Green Bay, and so that's what will happen. And also, at this point in the season, like other teams aren't going to want to bring on a quarterback. Like they have their own offenses they're trying to build. Like a different player, sure, but like you need to have your quarterback in place by late July.
And quick question: should Seattle's hockey team be called the Kraken or the Star Pucks?
I do like the Kraken. I'm gonna go Kraken. I think Kraken's a good name. I think they did a good job.
Okay. The jerseys are fantastic.
I have a bonus Swift question, and I want it, Worm. I know it's a constraint with you sometimes. I truly want this answered in 10 seconds or less because I want to get your true gut reaction. I had this conversation with PJ briefly recently. Remember that question you asked us about the teams we're fans of? If you had like 100 slider points, where would you position them based on who your true favorite team is?
Yeah.
Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis Jr., Vlad Guerrero Jr., the 22-year-olds that are just dominant right now. If you had 100 points to buy stock in them going forward, I want no rationale, nothing. I just want to get your thinking of which of those guys you go with. Spread out that 100 points in 10 seconds or less.
Sure. Before we start the 10 seconds, I just want to ask, you didn't say Acuna. Are we not including him?
I specifically excluded him with the injury right now. Just those 3 guys.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I will go Fernando Tatis, 60, Soto, 25, Vlad, 15.
Fair. You can't go wrong with any of those 3. I was just curious where your head was at.
I mean, they're all superstar. What our mutual friend Gary Carter will often text me just random baseball questions, something along those lines, like, "Who are you taking if you can start a franchise with one of these 4?" And like, it's just to me like Tatis is like the fact that he's a shortstop. Like, I that dude's generational. They're all generational, but that dude's like generational of the generationals.
Right.
Joe, what would you do? What would your numbers be?
I hate to say this, especially as a Mets fan. I would probably put most of my slider points on Soto. I'd probably go of the 100. I'd probably go 45 Soto, 25 Tatis, and then 35 Tatis, and then 20 on Guerrero. I gotta. Part of the thing with Vlad too is like, he did it now, but I also have to trust that he'll keep the weight off because we've seen now how different he is after the weight loss. He's possibly going to win a Triple Crown after the weight loss. If he could keep it off, sky's the limit, but we got to see first.
Well, the thing is, the bar is just harder to
math
clear
right on that? 45, 35, and 20?
I was kind of struggling.
Yes, it's right. It's right.
The thing with Vlad too is just that like the bar is so much harder to clear for a first baseman to be an elite hitter versus like a shortstop. Like that's for me, it's easy to pick Tatis first purely because he's a shortstop. But I believe that Soto is the best overall hitter in terms of like added value as a hitter because of the preternatural eye. And I believe that Guerrero has it in him to win multiple MVPs. It's just harder to do it as a first baseman.
They all might win multiple MVPs.
Yeah.
Like we're entering a great era of baseball.
I would, if you guaranteed me health, which I know you can't for anybody technically, but if you guaranteed me health, I would bet on all three of them making the Hall of Fame. Like they're all.
I would bet on all three of them making Inner Circle Hall of Fame with multiple MVPs.
They are jaw-droppingly good, and I think people don't. I think people take it for granted too much. It's sort of similar like with Giannis. Like I think some people realize he's great, but they don't realize how historically great he is. He's obviously a little further along in his career than those guys, but like they aren't just great for right now. They aren't just great for this century. They are great for all time.
Absolutely. Trivia question. Going off of your Fantasy Pros website, there are 21 players in the top 3 tiers. We talked about the tiers earlier. 4 teams have 2 players in that top 21 and top 3 tiers overall. So who are the 4 teams and who are the 2 players from each team that are among the top 21 in the top 3 tiers? You know the rules, 3 strikes, and you get 90 seconds.
Ooh, this is a great question that I am woefully unprepared for. I hope my bosses aren't listening.
I hope they are listening.
It goes 21 players, you said?
21 players in the top 3 tiers. 4 teams have multiple players.
Okay, the Chiefs, Tyreek and Kelsey.
That is correct. It's been 20 seconds.
The Packers, Devontae and Aaron Jones.
That is 2.
Whew. Would be up there. I'm trying to think of
seconds gone.
I'm trying to think of the running backs. So many of them. Let's go. I like this question a lot because I'm really struggling with it. The Saints, Kamara and Michael Thomas. Would they?
Strike one.
No, strike one.
Michael Thomas does not make it.
Okay. What a fall from grace.
Yeah. Michael Thomas is number 29.
A minute 5 gone. You got 2 strikes to work with.
Oh boy. I don't think they would have. Just because I need to put a guess out there, I don't think they have Amari, but the Cowboys, Amari and Zeke.
Nope. Not the Cowboys. 2 strikes. Just give us a Hail Mary here. Time's about up, but
okay, we're gonna say the team that is correct. We're the Titans. AJ Brown, Derrick Henry.
That would be correct, but you're well past the time now. The one that you missed, it was the toughest one because the player that just barely made it is 21 out of 21. The Vikings, Dalvin Cook, number 2, Justin Jefferson, 21.
Okay, I thought of the Vikings in my head, but I was like, I didn't think what the receivers would be high enough. Right. I would think they're more in the like 25 to 35 range. But I mean, I can't blame him. I mean, the dude set the rookie record.
There you go.
I got 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4. The Vikings was the tough one. That was the tough one.
That's a great question. So I'm now 1 for 2 on the trivia.
Still Hall of Fame, still Hall of Fame.
Wow, you're not wrong. I'm if anything better than Tatis, Soto, and Vladdy.
Not with that mustache. Anybody who doesn't watch us on YouTube doesn't get the full effect. If anybody's on Spotify, iTunes, or SoundCloud, consider yourself lucky that you don't have to look at it.
I know I said this already. I really can't unsee Jim Hopper now.
He was excellent in that movie, by the way, and I thought his Russian accent was fantastic.
I think he had the best Russian accent of the lot of them. I thought some of them really struggled there, but I thought his was the best. And I
didn't mind Florence Pugh's. I really didn't mind hers.
In Stranger Things, he's now stuck in like a Russian prison. So I thought it was kind of funny that they basically rescued him from the gulag.
That's true.
All right, Worm, we really appreciate it. So happy to have you on in your new official role that we are very happy to find out you got. I'm looking forward to seeing all your fantasy advice so I could fade it all season long.
That's probably the smart. Actually, no, that's definitely the smart call. I will also say, I don't know if I told you this, guys, like before we started recording or not, but not only am I doing a lot of social media stuff, they want me to do a lot of the TikTok stuff as well. So if you do want to see my probably not mustachioed face please go follow the Fantasy Pros TikTok. It's pretty new, so we have way fewer followers on there as the other accounts, but we're trying to grow it. So if you'll allow me that shameless plug, go follow us there, and also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. If you like fantasy at all, you'll enjoy what we have coming.
All right, Worm. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Great catching
Worm.
up again.
Terrell
And we will
Suggs
do it
episode.
again.
Well done.
We'll do it again when the season starts to go, because I'm sure we'll have plenty of fantasy football to talk about and plenty more Marvel stuff to talk about. And like we said, maybe we do have to have that pop-out episode to talk to dive into that too.
We will never run out of Marvel stuff to talk about. This is pop culture now.
Once again, that was our good buddy Ryan Wormeli, kind enough to join us. So happy for him that he has his new gig at Fantasy Pros running the social media. So make sure you follow those accounts to see what he's posting. A lot of good conversation, Joe. The one thing, though, we really didn't talk to him about that we'll get into now is the NBA Finals and Giannis's performance. Joe, I can't remember a time where a perception around an athlete has changed so quickly in 2 weeks than Giannis's. In that Brooklyn series and then a little bit of the Atlanta series, everybody was just, I mean, they were pooping on him. They were saying how overrated this guy was. He doesn't have a jump shot. He can't make free throws. He's a liability out there. And then game 3, game 4, game 5, game 6 of the NBA Finals, he puts together one of the best 4-game stretches you'll probably ever see. And he's completely flipped the narrative. Now everybody's saying he's the new king of basketball. Everybody's saying now that he's essentially won every award there is to win, except Rookie of the Year and Sixth Man, which
he'll never get Sixth Man.
He's now automatically a top 15, top 20 player. So I'm happy for Giannis. We both are really fans of him as a person, as a player. You called the Bucks at the beginning. Props to you. I still think had Brooklyn been healthy, who knows what would have happened. But
totally agreed. If Brooklyn were healthy, Brooklyn would have gotten through them. We never got to see it, unfortunately.
Right.
But
credit to the Bucks. Again, people forget that they were missing Dante DiVincenzo, and he's not as big a piece as some of these other players that were missing. But Drew Holiday obviously stepped up in certain games. Middleton was great. Bobby Portis was excellent. They really got some good contributions. And Joe, hopefully other players around the league, this can kind of start the trend of, super teams. Yes, they win titles, but also if you bet on yourself, you stay committed to a franchise, they put good players around you, they draft well, you can win a title too. And that's what the NBA needed. That's why I was so excited for these finals, because it was 2 fresh teams, 2 cities that were starving for a championship, players that were happy to be there. Nobody on either of those rosters ever won a title. It was exciting to watch, and happy for the Bucks. And now they're going to be a force for years to come, because now Giannis kind of might build his own super team by being in Milwaukee. He might make it a destination for people wanting to come there and play with them. So just happy for Giannis, and what a performance he put on in game 6.
Giannis finally was the example that the NBA tried to set out with the whole Supermax rule. Teams have skirted around it with the whole, I still don't understand how it works, where like you trade a guy, but like if you trade him by a certain time, then the team that he goes to gets his bird rights. And if that happens, then they're allowed to give him a Supermax. So like you get all that convoluted stuff going on. And it's a way to skirt the whole reason the rule was put in place. It was put in place to allow guys like Giannis to stay in Milwaukee, guys like Dame to stay in Portland. Now, that won't probably last too much longer, it seems like, but it still gave them an extra few years there for them to try to figure it out, even though they didn't the way that the Bucks did. It's great for the sport because, like you said, the more times we see teams win like this, the better. How great were these playoffs compared to past years?
Oh,
we truly never had any idea going into a series who was going to win. And sure, it was great to see Cavs Warriors for like 4 or 5 years running there, whatever it was, because it was a historic matchup and it was a historic team against a historic player. And it was fun to see going back and forth every year. But going into all of those seasons, we knew the outcome before the season even started. If we can no longer say that going forward, that's great. That's absolutely great for the sport and great for everything about it. So hopefully that continues to be the case. As far as Giannis, I mean, there's nothing else to be said about his performance itself, dropping 50, going 17 of 19 from the free throw line Are you kidding me? The way he's barely been shooting above 50%.
I know.
I mean, greatness to the highest exponent there of stepping up in the biggest, brightest moment and not shying away. But I want to talk more about things away from the court. The way he's handled himself through all this, the pre or post game press conference, I forgot which it was, where he talked about ego and humility and pride. It's the best 1 minute and 51-second clip you'll see all year. The way he was after winning the title, talking about how he did it the tough way and kind of throwing a little bit of a shot at some other teams with the super teams. Just an awesome story. His background, Nigerian parents going to Greece to create a better life, and his mom would have to sell things on the streets like CDs and stuff. He and his brothers would have to sell things on the streets to come to the U.S. and do this. I mean, when he was in Greece, Malika Andrews was telling the story that like he wasn't even considered Greek. They wouldn't give him citizenship until he came to the U.S. and joined the NBA. It's an incredible story. It was awesome to see him just break down entirely, crying on the court where he just sat on the chair there and just kind of took it all in. Just great scenes, great for the city, great for Giannis. You asked Worm over under 3.5 titles. I'll say under, just because I mean, how many guys that are stars like that have more? I mean, MJ has more, Kobe has more, LeBron is there, but it's not very, very common. I'll say under, but like Worm said, I'm going to say over on the MVP. He just won it twice. The main shot that people would take at him, like you were alluding to, he's a regular season player. He completely dispelled that finally. But he is a great regular season player who's going to continue to dominate regular seasons from here on out. And he's just 26 years old.
That's the thing, too. I mean, Jordan and LeBron, they had great success early in their years, stats-wise. But they really didn't formulate it in the playoffs. It took them a while. And now Giannis already has his title at 26, and he's just starting to get into his prime. And I know he's going to have to go through Brooklyn, and you would have to think that they're going to be healthy. And
Brooklyn's probably just 1 year, though. You look at the contract structure of that team, it's 2022, and that's it. That's probably their only shot at it, the 2021-2022 season. Because if they don't, whether they do or don't win, they probably have to move pieces after the upcoming season. So if he doesn't win it next year, fine. He's 27 the year after that, and there's no more Brooklyn. So he'll win more. I don't know if he'll win 4, but MVPs, is it far-fetched to think he wins 5, 6?
I don't know if he wins that many.
I mean, at some point, like we've seen with LeBron, at some point there is voter fatigue. Right. But the way he puts stats up, he does so in a way that even LeBron didn't, because he fills out the stat sheet way more than even LeBron did. And he's 26, so I'm not even talking, 4 more in the next, 6 years. He could win back-to-back MVPs at 28 and 29, which would give 4 years between his most recent MVPs. And then he could go another 4 years of that one, and he could win back-to-back at 33 and 34. That's how young he still is, where he could still win that many more without voter fatigue being an issue, because he could have dry spells and still be in his prime because he's still only 26. So I think he'll get to like 5 or 6. It's very, very possible.
Do you think he's the best player in the NBA?
Oh, gosh. I still think at this present moment, the best player in the NBA is Kevin Durant, and we saw that in the playoffs. Kevin Durant is aging, and I think he's got maybe a 2 to 3 year window to remain the best player, depending on what Giannis does the next couple of years. I would say he's the best all-around player, because Kevin Durant, as hard as he does work defensively, he's not defending the way Giannis does. He's not rebounding the way Giannis does. Until Giannis gets a better jump shot, he's not going to be as prolific as a scorer as KD is. But he's number 2 for me. I'm trying to think quickly through the league. I don't think LeBron's there anymore, even though LeBron is still great and he had that mantle for so long. I think it's KD. I think it's Giannis. I think that baton will be passed between those two guys in a year or 2, maybe 3, depending on how long KD stays at his peak. But it's not many people in that conversation.
Yeah, my top 5 in no particular order are KD, Giannis, LeBron, Steph Curry, and Embiid would be my top.
And I would say Giannis is better than all those guys with KD.
I would agree. Giannis and Kawhi is tough. Like, see, we do this every year in the playoffs. The guy who wins the title,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Steph Curry hasn't been in the finals the last 3 years, and it's like people
Hasn't been in
just
the
forget.
playoffs the last couple of years.
Right? And people just forget how good the guy is. I'm like, he's still he's the second greatest point guard of all time. But no, Giannis is great. I mean, what you say about best all-around player, that's hard to dispute. Just how he can fill a stat sheet, how he affects the game. And, like you said, the game 6, the free throws is just what really.
There was
I
a
mean,
bar that was
Giannis-
giving out free shots as a joke. As a joke, they advertised free shots for every free throw he makes to every person. So they had to give people, if they wanted it, 17 free shots. That's
Oh my
absurd.
God. Well, there are a
Poor
lot of dead
livers.
bodies in
Yeah.
Milwaukee right now.
Yeah.
Oh man. Joe,
It's
go ahead.
great. I mean, it was great to see the Deer District and everything there too. I mean, it was just brilliant scenes in Milwaukee.
It was. Now the next thing I want to talk about, which I got a lot of thoughts on, is this Texas-Oklahoma story.
Before you dive into it, I will say this. We will just mentioning in passing. Next week will be a big week for MLB trade deadline and Seattle Kraken. They had their expansion draft. They're going to start making trades and signing free agents this week, and the draft is this weekend. So we want to reserve that for next week because their roster is going to change a lot, and the trade deadline's next week, so we'll dive into it then. But now the floor is yours for Texas.
Man, so Texas-Oklahoma. So here's my thing, okay? Whenever a big college story breaks, everybody's mind automatically goes to football. And with those two programs, I understand why it would. But my thing with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC is, take football aside. Oklahoma just won the national championship in softball, and the SEC had like 10 of the top 25 teams in college softball of the ranked teams were in the SEC. College baseball, Texas was the number 2 overall seed this past season, and the SEC is the best conference in baseball. In women's college basketball, Texas, as you know, upset Maryland. They have one of the best coaches in Vic Schaefer, who turned Mississippi State into a mini dynasty there for a little bit. They're going to be loaded. And, in college basketball, they just got Chris Beard and Porter Moser to coach Texas.
Yeah.
So, I get it from a football standpoint, but from all these other sports as well, it's just going to make the SEC unbelievably competitive. And I hate it for the Big 12 because it's like the Yankees moving from the AL East to the NL Central, or it's like Duke moving from the ACC to the Big Ten. Those are your brands, Texas and Oklahoma. So my solution for the Big 12, what I'm kind of reading and listening to, and my assumption of all this is that Texas and Oklahoma obviously aren't happy with the Big 12 and the money disputes, and they're looking to go elsewhere because they just have had enough carrying the conference. So obviously ESPN and the SEC football have this big contract now. They're going to be the new CBS of the SEC, where they're going to have the best game every week, Fowler and Herb Street. I think CBS and the Big 12 should step in and make some kind of agreement that Big 12 now should be the new home for CBS, and maybe convince Texas and Oklahoma to stay. Because, Joe, if those two schools leave the Big 12,
Big 12's done.
What's the draw?
If those two schools leave the Big 12, I would all but guarantee you the Big 12 is dissolved within a couple of years, and you see teams just kind of start latching on elsewhere. Like maybe Iowa State joins the Big 10. Maybe TCU joins the American or something with Houston. Like you'll start seeing them go elsewhere. If those two teams are gone, the Big 12 is done within a few years. Baylor maybe tries to tag along into the SEC or something like that. There's some teams that could latch on with the Pac-12. So it's gone within a couple years. Having said that, I don't think this ever sees the light of day as an actual thing that happens because, like you said, it's a power play for them trying to strong arm into some more money for the TV and stuff. And think about some of the rationale behind it. They think that the SEC, you see every year, the SEC is sending 2 teams pretty much to the college football playoff. If we're getting the expansion that we truly seem to be getting, then there's no issues. Because sometimes the Big 12, there's question marks. Should the Big 12 be in? Should they not be in?
Right.
They've missed before. They've missed the college football playoff before.
Yep.
So that works into it too, where they say, oh, maybe if we're in the SEC, we'll get in more frequently. Now, if you're in the SEC, you're going to lose a lot more games, Oklahoma and Texas, and you're not going to get into the college football playoff. I've got news for you. So
Texas wants
to
finish 6th in the SEC instead of 4th in the Big 12. That's what they want to do.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, Texas has their Longhorn network and stuff, and you got the Big 12 network, and you like we said, if they go into the SEC, they're going to lose a lot more games in football, so they're not going to make the playoff anyway. They're going to stay in the Big 12. They're going to get the TV money they want, using this as a tactic to get some more money. Playoff expansion's coming, so they're going to have an assured spot instead of having to have these years where they're on the borderline. Those issues all resolved. But you do bring up a great point, though. And it's something that I am familiar with because I have this argument all the time with Maryland. It's like, oh, Maryland's really not worthy of the Big Ten. Look at what they do in football every year. You're not wrong. Football's getting better under Mike Locksley. But ever since Maryland joined the Big Ten, including men's sports and women's sports, no school has more Big Ten championships across all sports, men and women, than Maryland. So don't say Maryland doesn't belong.
That's what I'm saying.
Maryland's at the top of the mountain between men's and women's across all sports. So, and it's the same thing there with Texas and Oklahoma across all the other sports, men and women. So you can't just look at it through the lens of football. That is, at the end of the day, all that really matters, though, with all the money. It's the king. But even so, like I said, they'll stay.
Joe, I was with you. I'm originally, when I first saw it, I'm like, all right, it's SEC media days. Somebody's clearly just trying to get clicks. But, I mean, it is picking up some steam. I still would be shocked because, again, this is Texas and Oklahoma. Like, when it was Missouri and A&M, it's one thing.
Right.
But you're talking about two of the top 10 biggest brands in college athletics. I just I can't see
I can't see, besides that, like, I can't see how it makes sense for those schools to want to then be smaller fish in bigger ponds. Like, you're Texas, you're OU, you dominate the Big 12, you're the big fish there. You join the SEC, you're taking a back seat to Bama, you're taking a back seat to LSU. In a lot of years, you're taking a back seat to Auburn.
Georgia,
probably 80% of the time,
Florida.
You're taking a back seat to Georgia and Florida. So all of a sudden, you're not Texas and Oklahoma.
A&M. Look, I mean,
I don't know about A&M. A&M hit or miss on some years for A&M, but those other schools, you're taking a back seat to them every year. So there'll be some years where you take a back seat to Texas A&M too, and even Mizzou every now and then. Mizzou's in the thick of things here and there. So like there's pop-up teams here or there. Mississippi State, where they'll rise on a given year. Ole Miss, they're going to be pretty good this year with Coral at quarterback and Kiffin coaching things. But it's a whole different ballgame if you go from the Big 12 to the SEC, and it's a move that I think they would very quickly regret. So
I would agree. All right, Joe, and then let's see. So what we're going to do now as NFL season is approaching, before we get into trivia, we thought it would be a fun little idea to each week kind of have a prop bet that we like, or a future bet.
We're getting ready. We're getting back to the best bets during the season. We will do that and keep track of it again. And we figure the best way to ease back into it is in every week from here to the regular season kicking off. Once a week, we will give one future prop bet. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're 8 weeks away from the start of the NFL season. So by the time we kick off, you'll have 8 from me. You'll have 8 from PJ as far as future bets to maybe sprinkle on before the season starts. So without further ado, PJ, what are you starting us off with?
So I found one that I really like, actually. When we do this over the next couple weeks, I'm going to give you like teams I like to win the division and all that stuff. But one that I found that I really liked was over under 5.5 individual 200-yard receiving games this season.
Say that again. Over
under. Will there be over under 5.5 200-yard receiving games from receivers? So throughout the entire NFL season, will there be over 6 receiving games where X receiver has 200 yards or more, or will it be under? So I kind of like the over for that. You add the extra game. Again, last year there were so many high-scoring games because of obviously the pandemic, and defenses couldn't practice, and it was much harder for them than it was for some of the offenses with veteran quarterbacks, and that there were no fans and they can control the line of scrimmage. But man, I mean, again, with the offenses these days, with the quarterbacks, with the extra game, with the preseason and the OTAs, I think I kind of like over 6 at plus money, plus 115.
That's not bad at all. It's one of those that I personally would probably stay away from because you're sitting there saying to yourself, there's 272 games in an NFL season. And all 272 games have two teams involved. So you have 544 different individual chances. But for that number to be only 5.5, it's like Vegas knows something, and historically, it's a rare something that's rarer than you think it is. So I'd probably stay away from it. But if I had to pick, I would go over. That sounds like it's something that we could see happen this year. The way that offense is played in the NFL, and just touching on some of those receivers that we mentioned with Worm when we were talking about fantasy. There's a lot of guys who get a lot of balls thrown their way.
Yes, there are, and I just need 6 of them.
That's it. I'm going with one that I had last year, and I 1,000,000% would have won last year if not for an injury. When Dak Prescott broke his leg during the 5th game of the season, he was on pace for 6,500 passing yards. He would have cooled down at some point, but there's zero doubt in my mind he was topping 5,000, and there's zero doubt in my mind he was leading the league in passing yards last year, and there's zero doubt in my mind that he's going to be right back there again this year because we know the way that team is constructed, and we know that Dak Prescott is going to be slinging it all around the yard. He could very well touch 6,000 yards. It would not stun me with the extra game involved too, because again, last year he was on pace for 6,400. You extrapolate that out to a 17th game, he was on pace for 6,800 in a 17-game season. He is going to throw the ball a lot. They are going to pick up a lot of yards with the receivers they have, and he is 5-1 to lead the league in passing yards. He's only behind Pat Mahomes, and still it's chalky-ish because he's the second guy on that list, but still 5-1 to lead the league in passing when he was on his way to nearly 6,000 yards last year. Give me that all day, and I hope he stays healthy this time around.
You really like that Dallas offense this year because you like Zeke.
I don't like Dallas. I don't necessarily like Dallas because they're their defense, but I like the Dallas offense. Same thing like last year. I mean, had Dak not have gotten hurt last year, their record might not have been all that different than it was in the end because they don't play any defense. Right. But they would have scored a heck of a lot more points. I mean, think about before he got hurt, they had that like 40-something to 40-something game against the Falcons. Like they were putting up ridiculous video game type numbers. So whether they win games 45-42 or whether they're losing games 52-47, either way, they're putting up probably close to 30-40 a week, and there's going to be a lot of yards for Dak Prescott.
That's true. All right, Joe, it's trivia time. You are winning 21-20.
You got one back on me last week.
The gap after last week. Would you like to give me your question first, or should I go first?
I would. I will give you my question first. We're talking about all this parity, right, in the NBA, and we finally got the Bucks and Suns, two teams we don't usually see, and the whole postseason was, anybody's series at any time.
Right.
So on that note, for the NFL, since over the last 4 years, from 2017 to now, over the last 4 seasons, 24 of the 32 teams have made the playoffs at least once. In the last 4 years, only 8 teams have not once made the playoffs. Can you give me 6 of the 8 teams that in the last 4 years have not once made the playoffs?
In the NFL.
In the NFL.
Okay. Let's see. In the last, the Jets.
The Jets have the longest drought at 10 years.
Now
I'll give you a hint. After the Jets at 10 years, no drought is longer than 5.
Yeah. Cincinnati?
Cincinnati is among them. 5 years. So there's 2 of your 6 that you need.
God, the Dolphins. When was the last time they made it? Dolphins.
4 years. They're right there at the cutoff. 3 correct. All your strikes to work with. 30 seconds gone.
Let's see. Not the Bills, not the Pats. Ravens, Steelers, Browns, Chiefs, Chargers. No, Chargers made it. Broncos. Ooh. Broncos.
5 years for the Broncos. You're 4 for 4 so far. You need 2 more.
Raiders made it.
You got 30 seconds and all 3 strikes to work with.
Was that 4 years ago? Dallas Giants. The Giants.
4 years for the Giants. Give me one more, and you got it.
Was it the Raiders?
The Raiders, 4 years. You got it.
Okay.
There you go. I thought you would. If you want to try for the last 2, go for it.
Yeah. Let's see. Detroit.
Detroit.
And I'll go Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Those are the teams. Good one. I thought you would maybe trip up and say like, the Jaguars or something like that, and rack up a couple of strikes. But but there's been very good parity, and those are the teams. Only those 8 teams have not made it at least once in the last 8 years. So
damn, Joe, the Jets haven't made it in 10 years.
10 years.
I'm
For
sorry.
a long time. Drought's ending soon. Not this year, but next year.
So their last playoff game was the Steelers AFC Championship game?
That was their last playoff game.
Alrighty.
They made it back-to-back AFC title games and have not been there since.
That's rough. All right, Joe, your question. I gave you an NBA one.
All right.
Since 2000, there have now been 7 players who have won the NBA Finals MVP just once, including Giannis. So, of the other 6 since 2000, can you name me 4 of the 6 players who have only won Finals MVP just one time?
Okay, so since 2000,
correct.
4 of the 6 players who have won it just once. So correct. If I give you a guy who's won it more than once, that's a strike.
That will not be a strike.
That will not be a strike. It's only a strike if I give you someone who's never won.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I'll be friendly.
Okay.
But don't say LeBron. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So and we're excluding Giannis, of course.
We are excluding Giannis, correct.
We're excluding Giannis. Yes. Okay.
Go ahead.
Andre Iguodala.
Correct. 2015.
That one's the one that sticks out. Dwayne Wade.
Correct. 2006.
And Dirk Nowitzki.
2011. Correct.
Okay. So one more. Those are the ones that just stuck out because of just one-off champions. Because outside of that, we haven't had a lot of one-off champions. We've all had little mini dynasties here and there. I'm trying to think who would have won it the year the Pistons won, because they only won it once. And I need one more player.
You do. You got 50 seconds left, so you can use all 3 of your strikes on them if you want.
Was it Chauncey Billups? Was it just him?
It was Chauncey Billups. Well done. In 50 seconds too. The only 2.
I was starting to think about who maybe on some of the dynastic teams would have only won it once, but then I was like, wait a minute, we've had enough one-off champions where if I could just name those 4 teams, I'll get it.
So yeah, the only one on here of the dynastic teams was Tony Parker, just won it once.
Really?
And then it was Duncan the other years. And then Kawhi.
Kawhi got 2, yeah.
Yeah,
one with the Raptors, one with the Spurs. I mean, Kobe and Shaq each probably had.
Kobe was twice. Shaq, I believe, was 3 times.
Yeah.
Twice or 3 times. Yeah. LeBron's 4 or 5.
Right. The Celtics actually. Paul Pierce won it that year.
Yes.
That would have been another one.
The last one. Yep. There you go.
So you said it was 5 or 6.
6.
Who I gave you 4.
You got them all. Iguodala, Dirk.
Yeah. Who's the 6th one though?
You
said Tony Parker. Tony Parker.
Yep.
You said it. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Well, I like that question. That's a good, unique question too.
Yeah. So, and then Giannis was the 7th. So.
All right.
Well done. Look at that, Joe. I had the lead for a nice 50 seconds, or I tied at 50 seconds, and then you just snatched it right back.
Yeah. I was still on top by 1. Well, thank everybody for tuning in. 55 episodes gone. We're heading back into football season again, and we're giving you a taste of it with Worm and some of the fantasy talk, and us giving you a prop future best bet each week now until the season. Next week, more into the NHL with the Kraken, as they had their expansion draft the other night. They have the actual draft this weekend, and free agency starts next week, and there'll be a bevy of trades throughout. So we'll reserve that for next week. get into the trade deadline for the MLB next week. Basketball's going to take a back seat now for a couple of months. Hockey, after that talk next week, takes a back seat for a couple of months, and we are left standing with football starting and baseball running to its conclusion. So that's all.
Joe,
exciting
once
stuff.
the Olympics end, it's kind of the worst time of the year because it's like
I
right
think we're
before
already
the
there.
pennant race.
I think
up.
we're already there. I
You
think
think
we're in the
so?
worst spot right now.
Yeah,
I
we
do.
might. Yeah, I mean
Because
that's fair.
The Olympics, like, I'm not a huge Olympic guy, but even so, like, the best stuff is reserved to like more towards the end of the Olympics, sort of ish. There's some things that pop up, but if a lot of the big events are kind of reserved for more towards the end of the Olympics, right now, all we got is baseball going on.
Yeah,
and like in golf, and then we'll have next week training camp start more and stuff. But then we get the close of the Olympics. I can see what you mean there. Yeah.
By the way, Colin Morikawa, we were talking about DeChambeau last week. Morikawa would have been next on my list of top players I could have given you that I never, ever would have guessed to win the Open.
Oh, yeah.
Just because that was his first, but look, he got lucky. The weather was perfection.
Yeah.
So credit to him. He took
Yeah.
advantage. But, I mean, I bet Jordan Spieth, and the guy was just right there.
Yeah, my dad bet Oosthuizen at 30-1.
I bet Fleetwood 2 years ago, and he finished second. So you know what? I
bet Rahm. He finished third. All my guys were there. I said if an American wins, it's going to be Spieth. He came right there. I had Rahm as my pick. He was third, and I liked Oosthuizen, but I didn't pull the trigger like my dad did at 30-1, and he was right there. So we were all right there. But Morikawa came in and took it. Real quick before we officially sign off, I answered. Worm answered. How are you dividing that up between Vlad, Tatis, and Soto?
Tatis 50, Soto 35, Vlad 15. My thing about
so I'm the only one going with Soto.
Yeah, my thing about Vlad is I see a very Pujols Miggy trajectory.
Yeah, that's a good comp.
In the sense that his peak is going to be insane, but he's going to get beefy. He's only going to be able to be a DH or first baseman late in his career, and his power numbers are going to
the overall value, like Worm was saying, isn't going to be the same as a Tatis or even a Soto in the outfield. So,
like Soto, I mean, that dude could hit 300 his entire career. Tatis is just, I mean, he's got so many like young A-Rod intangibles to him, just like the athletic nature and the joy that he has, and he hits for power and average, and he's such a good defender, and he plays out in the West Coast.
Yeah.
And so, but
really
Vladdy to me is just kind of enjoy him now and over the next 5-7 years, because it's going to be Pujols and Miggy like, but towards the back half, he's gonna fizzle out.
I can see that, and we didn't even mention Acuna because injury. We got to see how he comes back from the torn ACL, but he's in that mix too. So baseball is in very good hands going forward. Yeah. And so is the Glass of Joe podcast with Joe Malfa and PJ Glasser. Episode 56 next week. Thanks for tuning in to 55. We will catch you then.